There is a town in Mississippi where the median household income, adjusted for inflation, is lower than it was in 1937. Read that sentence again, slowly. Not lower than the national average, not lower than the state average, lower than the actual dollar figure that families in that same town were earning during the worst year of the Great Depression. After you adjust for 90 years of inflation, after you account for every economic recovery, every New Deal program, every War on Poverty initiative, every Reagan boom, every Clinton surplus, every Obama stimulus, every Trump tax cut, every Biden infrastructure bill, after all of it, the number is lower. That town is called Tutwiler. It is the place where, according to documented oral history, the Delta Blues was born. A traveling musician named W.C. Handy heard a man playing slide guitar with a knife on the railway platform there in 1903, and the world changed. American music changed. Global popular music changed. Billions of dollars of cultural and economic value flowed out of that one platform, that one moment, that one town. None of it stayed. The blues was born in Tutwiler, and then the blues left, and nothing else ever arrived to take its place. I am Report State, and tonight I'm going to walk you through 10 American towns where the Great Depression never officially ended. It just stopped being on the news. The cameras left in 1940. The reporters moved on to the war. The country told itself a story about recovery, about progress, about the American century. And in these 10 towns, the story was a lie. The numbers prove it. The census proves it. The federal government proves it in a category they quietly maintain called persistent poverty counties. A town earns that designation by having more than 20% of its population below the poverty line for 3 consecutive decades. Most of the counties on that list have been there since the 1970s. Some have been there since the list was invented. These are not places that fell on hard times. These are places where time itself stopped moving. You are going to see numbers in this video that look like typos. You are going to see one town where 71% of residents are on food stamps. You are going to see another where the entire social safety net is a single church, run by a woman in her 70s with no salary and no successor. You are going to see a town that lost 90% of its population and never recovered. And you are going to see, at number 1, a place where the data is so out of step with modern America that the federal economists themselves had to double-check it. Subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, because what I am about to show you is the America that the brochures do not include, the America that the highway signs do not point to, the America that the tourism boards have erased from the map. And once you see it, once you really see the numbers, you cannot unsee them. You will start noticing them everywhere. You will drive through a small town on a road trip and you will recognize the silence. You will see the boarded windows and you will know what they mean. This is not a trip you take to feel good. This is a trip you take to understand the country you actually live in. Let's break it down. From number 10 down to the town where the blues was born and never left. Number 10, Beattyville, Kentucky. They call it the capital of forgotten America, and the people who call it that, the ones who wrote the headlines, they got tired of writing the headlines a long time ago because the story never changed. Beattyville sits in Lee County, deep in the eastern Kentucky coalfields. It is small. The population, last time the census knocked on doors, hovered around 1,700 people. The town is named after a man named Samuel Beatty, who founded it in 1846 as a salt mining outpost on the Kentucky River. For about 100 years, the place did what these places do. It mined coal, it cut timber, it shipped goods downriver. It made enough money to build a courthouse and a few churches and a main street that, if you saw it in a photograph from 1930, you would call charming, American, stable. Then the coal ran out. Or, to be more precise, the coal that was easy to get ran out, and the timber companies clear-cut the hills and moved on. And the river stopped being the highway it used to be, because the highways became actual highways, and Beattyville was not on one. So the trains stopped, the trucks went around, and by the 1960s, Beattyville was already what it is today, a town with no economic engine, a town held together by federal disability checks, food stamps, and the stubbornness of people who do not want to leave. Here is the number that broke me when I first read it. The median household income in Beattyville, according to the most recent census data, is $14,800 per year. Per household. Not per person, per entire family. Now let me put that in context, because the number alone is just a number. The federal poverty line for a family of 3 is around $23,000, so the median family in Beattyville is making 64% of the poverty line. The median family. Half of the families in Beattyville are making less than that. Some of them are making half of that. Adjusted for inflation, $14,800 in 2022 has the same buying power as about $900 in 1937. And in 1937, a coal miner in eastern Kentucky was making, on average, between $1,100 and $1,400 a year. So the median household in Beattyville today, with both parents working in many cases, is bringing in less real money than a single coal miner brought home during the Great Depression. What never tells you that? The economic charts on the news, with the green line going up and to the right, the Dow Jones at record highs, the GDP growth, the unemployment rate at historic lows. None of that math includes Beattyville. Beattyville is not in the average. Beattyville is what the average hides. A reporter from a national paper went to Beattyville a few years ago and sat in the only diner that was still open. He talked to a waitress named Linda Marsh. Linda is 61 years old. She has worked in that diner for 26 years. She told the reporter, in a quote that has stayed with me, __quote_0__. Picture this. You wake up in a wood frame house your grandfather built in 1941. The roof leaks in 2 places. You patch it with tar paper because a new roof costs more than your annual income. You drive to your job, which pays $9 an hour, in a car you bought used for $1,500, with a check engine light that has been on for 3 years. You stop at the dollar store on the way home because that is where groceries come from now. You pass the old high school, which closed in 2007. You pass the old hospital, which closed in 2015. You pass the train station, which closed in 1968, and which still has the original sign, faded but legible, because nobody has the money or the reason to take it down. That is Beattyville. That is the capital of forgotten America. And if you think Beattyville is rough, the next town on this list lost something Beattyville never had and never recovered. Number 9, Welch, West Virginia, the coal town that coal forgot. Welch sits in McDowell County, which has the unfortunate distinction of being one of the most studied poverty zones in the United States. Sociologists love McDowell County. Documentary filmmakers love McDowell County. Politicians love to take photo ops in McDowell County. None of them have managed to fix it. In 1950, McDowell County had a population of just over 100,000 people. It was the largest coal-producing county in the world. The largest in the world. Coal trains ran through Welch around the clock. The downtown had 3 department stores, 2 movie theaters, a hotel that hosted miners and their families on payday weekends, and a baseball team that drew crowds from across the state. The schools were full, the churches were full. The streets were so crowded on Saturday nights that the city council passed an ordinance limiting how long you could park on Main Street because there was not enough room for everyone who wanted to come into town. Today, McDowell County has a population of about 17,000. It lost 83% of its people in 70 years. Welch itself, which used to have over 6,000 residents, has fewer than 2,000 now. The poverty rate in Welch is 33%, 1 in 3 people. The median household income is just over $20,000. Adjusted for inflation, that is again less than what a coal miner in 1937 was earning in real purchasing power. Life expectancy in McDowell County is 63 years for men. 63. That is 15 years lower than the national average. It is the lowest in the entire United States. There are countries with active armed conflicts where men live longer than they do in McDowell County, West Virginia. What happened? Coal happened, and then coal stopped happening. Mechanization in the 1950s cut the workforce in half. Cleaner energy sources cut it again in the 1970s. The REMA cleaner energy sources cut it again in the 1970s. The remaining mines automated through the 80s and 90s. By 2000, McDowell County had 10% of the mining jobs it had in 1950, producing nearly the same amount of coal. The coal kept coming, the paychecks did not. And then the opioids arrived. McDowell County became, for a stretch of years in the early 2000s, the county with the highest per capita prescription opioid distribution in the entire United States. Pharmacies in towns of a few hundred people were dispensing tens of thousands of pills per month. The pills came in. The jobs were already gone. The combination did what you would expect. I want you to picture Welch on a Tuesday afternoon. The main street has more empty storefronts than occupied ones. The old McDowell County Courthouse, a beautiful stone building from 1904, is still operating. But most of the offices on the upper floors are closed. There is a Family Dollar, there is a gas station, there is a free clinic that is open 3 days a week and is funded by donations from a hospital 2 counties over. The hospital in Welch itself closed in 2016. A woman named Bernice Hatfield, who is not related to the famous Hatfields, runs a food pantry out of the basement of a Methodist church. She is 74 years old. She has been running it for 19 years. When a journalist asked her recently who would take over when she could not do it anymore, she said, very plainly, quote, "1. That is the safety net of Welch, West Virginia, a 74-year-old woman in a church basement with no successor. The Great Depression in 1933 brought bread lines to every American city. Photographs of those bread lines became the defining images of the era. A bread line meant a society in crisis, a society that needed to act. Welch has had a bread line in the form of Bernice's food pantry every single week for 19 years. There are no photographs in the national news. There is no crisis declared. The bread line just is. It is part of the town now. It is, like the leaking roof and the closed hospital, simply how things are. And here is the question Welch forces on me, the question I cannot stop turning over. If a bread line in 1933 meant the country was in a depression, what does a permanent bread line in 2025 mean? What is the word for that? I do not have a clean answer. The next town might have one, because in the Mississippi Delta, the word for it is older than the country itself. Number 8, Belzoni, Mississippi, the catfish capital with empty pockets. Belzoni calls itself the catfish capital of the world. There is a giant fiberglass catfish in the town square. There is a catfish festival every spring. There are murals of catfish on the walls of the buildings downtown. The local economy was supposed to be built in the late 1960s and 70s on the rise of farmed catfish as a southern agricultural product. For a while, it almost worked. Belzoni had processing plants. It had jobs. It had a brief moment in the sun. Then, Vietnamese imports flooded the market in the 2000s. The American catfish industry, which had been sustained by tariffs and labeling rules, lost most of its margin. Plants closed. The ones that stayed open cut wages. Belzoni's population, which had been around 2,600 in the year 2000, is now under 1,500. And those who stayed are poor in a way that the Catfish Festival cannot disguise. The poverty rate in Belzoni is 41%. 41. The median household income is just over $21,000. The town sits in Humphreys County, which is one of the poorest counties in the United States by almost any measure you choose. Child poverty in Humphreys County is over 50%. More than half of the children in Belzoni are growing up below the poverty line. But here's the part of the Belzoni story that I cannot get past. The Mississippi Delta poverty is not new. It is not the result of recent industrial collapse. It is not the result of a factory closing in the 1980s or a mine running out in the 1960s. The poverty in the Delta predates the Great Depression. It predates the Civil War. It is what the historian James C. Cobb, in his definitive book on the region called, quote, "2, a place where the plantation economy never really ended, it just changed its name. From slavery to sharecropping to tenant farming to seasonal agricultural labor to processing plants, every iteration kept most of the wealth at the top and left almost nothing at the bottom." The Great Depression in 1929 did not start the poverty in Belzoni. It just made the rest of the country briefly notice that the poverty was there. When the rest of the country recovered, Belzoni did not. Because Belzoni had never been part of what was recovering, picture this. You are a child in Belzoni. You go to a school where the building was constructed in 1958. The textbooks are old. The library has a few hundred books. You qualify for free school lunch automatically because everyone in your school does. The town has one grocery store, which is a Save-A-Lot. To buy fresh produce, your mother drives 45 minutes to a Walmart in Greenville. There is no movie theater. The downtown has the Catfish statue, the Catfish Festival in April, and not much else. The most successful person from your high school in the last 20 years is a man who joined the Navy and never came back. The unsuccessful ones are visible. They sit on porches. They are your cousins. You learn, very young, that the world has decided about your town. You can leave and the town loses one more person, or you can stay and the town keeps you. There is no third option. There is no version where the town gets better and you get to participate in that improvement. The improvement is not coming. That is Belzoni. That is the catfish capital of the world. And the next town on this list shares the same river, the same delta, the same long shadow, but it has the bonus distinction of having literally drowned multiple times while the rest of the country looked away. Number 7, Helena, Arkansas, the river town that drowned in place. Helena sits on the Mississippi River, just across the state line from the Mississippi Delta proper. In the 1800s, it was a major river port. Cotton came down the river. Goods went up the river. Helena had a downtown of brick warehouses, a busy waterfront, a hotel that hosted Mark Twain. The town was, by the standards of the era, prosperous. Then came the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. The flood destroyed Helena's economy, displaced thousands of residents, and exposed, in a way the country could not ignore, the racial and economic structure of the Delta. Black sharecroppers, who made up most of the labor force, were held in flood camps under armed guard, while white landowners decided how the relief money would be distributed. The historian John M. Barry, in his book Rising Tide, documents this in detail. The flood was a natural disaster. The response was a political one. And the response made Helena, and dozens of towns like it, even poorer than they had been before the water came. The town never recovered. It survived the Depression on federal aid. It survived the 1940s on the wartime economy. It limped through the 1950s and 60s on agriculture. And then, slowly, like Beattyville and Welch, it just kept losing people. Helena's population today is around 11,000, down from 20,000 at its peak. The poverty rate is 36%. The median household income is just over $25,000. The downtown, those beautiful brick warehouses, is mostly empty. Some of the buildings have collapsed. Some have been demolished. Some are still standing with no one inside, slowly being eaten by the river damp. What I want you to understand about Helena is that it is, in some ways, more painful than Beattyville or Welch, because the bones of what it once was are still visible. You can walk down Helena's main street and see a building that, if it were in Brooklyn or Austin, would be worth millions of dollars. It is a beautiful 19th century commercial structure with cast iron columns and high ceilings and tall windows. In Brooklyn, it would be a co-working space and a wine bar. In Helena, it is empty, and has been empty for 30 years, because there is no economy in Helena that needs co-working space or wine bars. The buildings are too good for the town that survived. They are relics of a town that died. A man named Walter Lee Holmes, who is in his 80s now, told an oral historian a few years ago about growing up in Helena in the 1940s. He said, "We were poor, but we did not know we were poor, because everyone was poor, and everyone was working. The work was hard, but it was there. Now the children grow up knowing they are poor, because the rest of the world is on television, and they can see what they do not have. And the work is not there anymore. That is the difference. That is the worst thing." That distinction between poor with work and poor without work runs through every town on this list. The Great Depression brought mass unemployment to a country that had been employed. These towns are now in a state the Depression generation would not have recognized. Permanent partial unemployment. A town where there is some work, but not enough work, and never will be enough work, and everyone knows it, and the town is just slowly running out of people to use up. It is a sadder math than the Depression. The Depression had an end date. This does not. And Helena has neighbors on the same river who are doing even worse. Which brings us to number 6, where two great American rivers meet at a town that has, in every meaningful way, given up. Number 6, Cairo, Illinois, where two rivers meet and nothing grows. Cairo, pronounced Cairo by the locals, sits at the confluence of the Mississippi and the Ohio rivers. Geographically, it should be one of the most important small cities in the United States. It sits at the junction of two major river highways and the rail lines that follow them. In the 1860s, Ulysses S. Grant used Cairo as a Union supply base. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Cairo was a boom town. It had a population of over 15,000, a thriving downtown, ornate Victorian houses, a steam-powered ferry, and ambitions of becoming the next St. Louis. Today, Cairo has a population of under 1,500. It lost 90% of its people in 100 years. The downtown is largely abandoned. Entire blocks of beautiful houses have been demolished by the city itself, not because of urban renewal, but because the houses had been empty for so long that they were structural hazards. There are streets in Cairo where you can walk for several blocks and see nothing but vacant lots and the occasional concrete foundation, surrounded by tall grass, where a home used to stand. The grass is mowed by the city to keep the rats down. That is the only municipal service many of these blocks still receive, mowing for rats. What happened to Cairo? Many things, but the central thing was racial conflict. In the late 1960s and early 70s, Cairo erupted in what historians describe as one of the longest sustained civil rights confrontations in American history. White business owners refused to hire black workers. Black residents organized boycotts. White vigilantes, sometimes openly armed, patrolled the town. The boycotts worked, in the sense that they bankrupted many of the white businesses, but the businesses did not get replaced. They just closed. And the town that emerged from that conflict was a town where almost no one wanted to invest, and almost everyone with options left. The white population fled to the suburbs of St. Louis and Memphis. The black population, which had fewer options, stayed, and the town that remained was overwhelmingly poor, underfunded, and abandoned by the state of Illinois itself, which has provided minimal investment in Cairo for 50 years. The poverty rate in Cairo is over 40%. The median household income is just under $20,000. The high school closed in 2018, consolidated with a school in another county. The hospital closed years before that. The grocery store closed in 2015. To buy food, residents drive across the river bridge to Kentucky or Missouri. There is one gas station that sells some basic items, but it is not a grocery store, and the prices reflect the absence of competition. Picture this. You stand on the levee in Cairo, looking out at the place where the Ohio meets the Mississippi. It is one of the most geographically dramatic spots in the United States. two enormous rivers, brown and gray, merging into a single channel that flows down to New Orleans. Behind you, the town, boarded windows, empty lots, the skeleton of a downtown that, at one time, expected to be a great American city. The contrast between what the geography promises and what the town has become is almost unbearable. The rivers are doing exactly what they have always done. The town is not. Cairo is, to me, the most heartbreaking entry on this list because it is the clearest example of how a place can have every advantage and still lose. The rivers are still here. The rail lines are still here. The geographic position is still extraordinary. None of it matters because the human systems that decide where investment goes, where jobs are created, where futures are built, decided about Cairo a long time ago. And the decision was no. And if Cairo is what happens when geography cannot save you, the next town is what happens when industry cannot save you, even when the industry is right there, across the river, employing other people, just not you. Number 5, Camden, New Jersey, in the pockets that the cameras do not show. Camden is famous. Most of you have heard of Camden, New Jersey, even if you have never been there. It has been on news magazines as the most dangerous city in America. It has been on documentary series as a symbol of American urban decay. It is the rare, poor American place that has actually had national attention sustained over decades. But here's the thing. The story of Camden is not the same story as the story of Beattyville, or Welch, or Belzoni, or Helena, or Cairo. Camden is not a small, isolated town that was forgotten. Camden is right across the Delaware River from Philadelphia. Camden is 20 minutes from a major American city, with all of its jobs, its hospitals, its universities. Camden has shipyards, port facilities, an aquarium, a baseball stadium. Camden has, in its waterfront district, looked like it might be on the verge of revitalization for 40 years now. And yet, the pockets of Camden where most people actually live, the residential neighborhoods that the tourists do not see when they come for a Phillies game across the river, are as poor as anywhere on this list. The poverty rate in Camden as a whole is around 35%. In the poorest neighborhoods, it is over 50%. The median household income for the city is around $27,000. The homicide rate has fluctuated for decades, but remains among the highest in the country for a city of its size. The schools are chronically underfunded. The water infrastructure is so old that lead contamination has been a recurring crisis. Most of the city's housing stock was built before 1940. What Camden teaches us is that proximity to wealth does not equal access to wealth. You can stand on the Camden waterfront and look across the river at the Philadelphia skyline. The buildings of one of the wealthiest metropolitan economies in the United States are right there. You can almost touch them. But the river is wider than it looks. The jobs in those buildings, mostly, are not for you. The schools that prepare children for those jobs are not your schools. The networks that connect candidates to those jobs do not include you. You can see the wealth, you cannot reach it. Camden's industrial collapse happened in the 1970s and 80s, when companies like RCA, Campbell Soup, and the New York Shipbuilding Corporation either closed their Camden operations or moved them. Tens of thousands of jobs disappeared in less than 2 decades. The city's tax base collapsed. White flight accelerated. The municipal government went bankrupt, was placed under state control, and has been in some form of state oversight or financial dependency ever since. A teacher named Marisol Ortiz, who has taught in Camden public schools for 22 years, said in a recent interview, quote, 5 Camden is the urban version of the Mississippi Delta. The poverty has the same flavor. The hopelessness has the same texture. The Great Depression in Camden was not the bottom. It was just an early chapter in a longer decline. And from Camden, we move to the southern border, where the poverty is not industrial, but agricultural, not black or white, but brown. And the federal government's own statistics struggle to capture how poor it really is. Number 4, Brownsville, Texas. America's edge, America's forgotten. Brownsville sits on the Rio Grande, directly across from Matamoros, Mexico. It is the southernmost city in Texas. The population is around 185,000, so it is much larger than the other towns on this list, but its poverty rate is one of the highest of any city of its size in the United States. About 30% of Brownsville residents live below the federal poverty line. The median household income is around $43,000, which sounds higher than the towns we have discussed, until you adjust for cost of living and household size, and then it is comparable. But Brownsville's real poverty is not in the city itself. It is in the surrounding colonias. A colonia is a settlement on the outskirts of a Texas border town, often unincorporated, often without basic infrastructure, often built on land that was sold cheaply to low-income families decades ago, without water, sewer, or paved roads. The Texas state government estimates that there are over 2,300 colonias along the Texas-Mexico border, home to roughly 500,000 people. Many of these settlements have no piped water. Many have no sewer connections, relying on septic systems or, in the worst cases, no formal sewage at all. Many have unpaved dirt roads that turn to impassable mud during the rainy season. The colonias around Brownsville include some of the poorest census tracts in the entire United States. Median household incomes in some colonias are under $15,000. Poverty rates exceed 50%. Most of the residents are Mexican American. Many of them work in agricultural labor or service jobs in Brownsville itself, and most of them have lived in the same colonia for 2 or 3 generations. What is striking about the colonias, and what connects them to the rest of this list, is that the federal government has been aware of the problem for at least 40 years and has done relatively little to fix it. There have been programs, there have been studies, there have been promises. The infrastructure deficits remain. In 2023, a federal report estimated that addressing the basic water and sewer needs of all Texas colonias would cost approximately $2 billion. $2 billion sounds like a lot. It is 1/10,000th of the federal budget. It has not happened. Picture a colonia outside Brownsville on a hot July afternoon. The temperature is 104 degrees. The houses are a mix of small wooden structures, single-wide trailers, and concrete block construction. The streets are dirt. There is no breeze. A woman named Esperanza, 52 years old, walks half a mile to the nearest convenience store to buy bottled water because her well water has tested positive for nitrates. Her grandchildren play in the yard. They do not go to a public pool because there is no public pool. They do not go to a library because there is no library. They do not have internet at home because the colonia is not wired for it. Esperanza works as a home health aide in Brownsville. She makes $12 an hour. Her husband works in construction when there is work. They have lived in this house, in this colonia, for 31 years. They are American citizens. Their children are American citizens. Their grandchildren are American citizens. The America they live in is the America that the rest of the country and the rest of the federal government has somehow not gotten around to. Brownsville and its colonias are what happens when the Great Depression standard of living gets quietly maintained as a permanent feature of an American region. In this case, justified by the proximity of an even poorer country, Mexico, which makes the colonias look, by comparison, like progress. Compared to a Mexican village, a Texas colonia is a step up, so no one ever fixes the colonia. The colonia is permanently better than the alternative across the river, and permanently worse than anywhere else in the United States. That is the deal. The deal has been the deal for 50 years. And from the southern border, we go all the way west to a town in California that has a story so unusual it deserves its own documentary, but which, like every other town on this list, ended up in the same place. Number 3, Allensworth, California. The black utopia that California drained. Allensworth was founded in 1908 by a man named Allensworth, who was born into slavery in Kentucky, escaped during the Civil War, fought for the Union Army, became a Baptist minister, and then a chaplain in the United States Army, eventually retiring as a lieutenant colonel, at the time, the highest-ranking black officer in the entire American military. After his retirement, he came to California with a vision. He wanted to build the first town in California founded, financed, and governed entirely by African Americans. A self-sufficient community where black families could own land, run businesses, educate their children, and live free from the racial violence and segregation of the post-Reconstruction South. For a brief, remarkable period, it worked. By 1914, Allensworth had over 200 residents, a school, a library, a Baptist church, a hotel, several stores, a justice of the peace, and a railroad stop on the Santa Fe line. It was a real town, a working town, owned and operated by black Americans. It was, by every reasonable measure, a triumph. And then California killed it. Allensworth's water came from underground wells in the San Joaquin Valley. In the 1910s and 20s, the surrounding agricultural operations, owned by large white landowners, drilled deeper wells that drew down the water table. Allensworth's wells started producing less water, and water of poorer quality. By the 1930s, the water had become contaminated with arsenic. The Santa Fe Railroad, which had originally promised to keep the Allensworth stop in service, rerouted its line a few miles away, cutting the town off from the rail economy. Without water and without rail access, Allensworth's economy collapsed. Most residents left. By the 1960s, Allensworth was nearly a ghost town. In the 1970s, the state of California turned what was left of Allensworth into a state historic park, preserving some of the original buildings as a monument to the town's founding vision. But the people who still lived in the area, the descendants of the original Allensworth settlers and other low-income Black and Latino residents who moved in over the decades, continued to live there, in a community that had been officially erased from the economic map of California. Today, the area around Allensworth has a poverty rate of nearly 40%. The median household income is around $23,000. The water situation has not been fully resolved. Residents still struggle with arsenic contamination. There is no grocery store. There is no school. There is a state historic park where tourists come on weekends to see the preserved buildings and read the plaques about Colonel Allensworth's vision. The tourists drive in. They take photos. They drive out. They do not buy anything in the town that exists today around the historic park because there is almost nothing to buy. Allensworth tells us something the other towns on this list cannot. The other towns are stories of decline, of having something and then losing it. Allensworth is a story of theft. It is a story of a community that did everything right, that built something real, and that had the foundations of its existence, water, transportation, economic access, quietly taken away by more powerful interests, and then was abandoned to live in the ruins. The Great Depression in Allensworth was not just an economic event. It was the result of a systematic dismantling of the conditions that had made the town possible. That, by the way, is the story of poverty in a lot of America. Not just bad luck, not just market forces. Decisions made by powerful actors in courtrooms and corporate boards and state legislatures that chose over and over to let certain places die. Allensworth makes this visible. The other towns hide it under more general narratives. And from the inland west, we go to the Gulf Coast, to a town where the work that built America is still being done, and the people doing it are paid wages that the rest of the country pretends do not exist anymore. Number 2, Bayou, Batre, Alabama. Shrimp boats and saltwater wages. Bayou Batre is on the Gulf of Mexico, about 30 miles south of Mobile. If you have seen the movie Forrest Gump, you have seen Bayou Batre. The shrimping village where Forrest goes into the shrimp business with Lieutenant Dan, that is Bayou Batre. The film made the town briefly famous in 1994. The fame did nothing for the town. Bayou Batre has a population of just over 2,000 people. Its economy is built on three things: commercial shrimping, seafood processing, and shipbuilding for the smaller end of the Gulf maritime industry. All three of those industries have been in slow collapse for 30 years. Shrimping has been undercut by cheaper imports from Asia. Seafood processing has been automated and offshored. Shipbuilding survives in pockets, but the contracts are smaller and the wages are lower than they were a generation ago. The poverty rate in Bayou Batre is just over 30%. The median household income is around $28,000. About a third of the residents are Vietnamese American or Cambodian American, descendants of refugees who came to the Gulf Coast in the 1970s and 80s and brought their fishing skills with them. They built a community. They built businesses. They worked harder than anyone I have ever read about. And they ended up like the white shrimpers and the black laborers who worked the docks alongside them in a town where the entire economy is one bad hurricane season away from collapse. And then Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005. And then the BP oil spill hit in 2010. And then a series of smaller storms in the years that followed. Every disaster set the town back. Every recovery was incomplete. The federal aid arrived. The federal aid was inadequate. The federal aid stopped. And the town, again, was left to figure out what came next on its own. A shrimp boat captain named Tommy Nguyen, who came to Bayou Batre as a child in 1978, told a journalist a few years ago, "We work the same hours my father worked. We catch the same shrimp my father caught. We sell to the same processors. The price we get is the same price he got in 1985. But the diesel costs 3 times more. The boat costs 5 times more. The insurance costs 10 times more. So we are working harder for less every single year. And the only thing that keeps us going is that we do not know how to do anything else." That sentence, "We are working harder for less every single year, and we do not know how to do anything else," is the sentence of permanent partial poverty in modern America. It is the sentence of Beattyville and Welch and Belzoni and Helena and Cairo and Camden and Brownsville and Allensworth. It is the sentence of every town on this list. The work is still there sometimes. The work pays less than it used to. The cost of being alive has gone up. The math does not work, and there is no version of the math that will start working because the larger economic system has decided that this is the price for this work, and there is no negotiation. Adjusted for inflation, the wages of a Bayou Batre shrimper in 2024 are lower than the wages of a Bayou Batre shrimper in 1937. Same boats, same nets, same waters, same fish, lower wages. The Great Depression in Bayou Batre never officially ended. The shrimpers just kept shrimping, and the country looked away. If these 9 towns are ghosts of the 30s, the next one is the 30s itself, frozen, untouched, and forgotten. And it is a town whose name you have never heard, in a state you think you know, where the federal economists themselves had to double-check the data because the numbers looked like a typo. This is the town where the blues was born, and where the blues stayed, because nothing else ever was. Number 1, Tutwiler, Mississippi, where the blues was born and stayed forever. Tutwiler sits in Tallahatchie County, in the heart of the Mississippi Delta. The population is around 250 people. 250. That is not a typo. The town that is, by certain reasonable arguments, the birthplace of the most influential popular music in human history, the Delta Blues, which became Chicago Blues, which became rock and roll, which became every popular musical form of the 20th century, has fewer residents than a single suburban apartment complex. The poverty rate in Tutwiler is 47%. Almost half of the residents live below the federal poverty line. The median household income is $19,400. The unemployment rate, when you include people who have stopped looking for work, is over 30%. About 71% of residents receive some form of food assistance, whether SNAP benefits, WIC, free school lunch, or food pantry support. 71%. In a country where the national average is around 12%. In a town, in a state, in a region where the soil is among the most fertile in the world. Adjusted for inflation, the median household income in Tutwiler today has roughly the same purchasing power as the median household income in Tutwiler in 1937. The same. 90 years of American economic history, the New Deal, World War II, the post-war boom, the Civil Rights Movement, the war on poverty, the Reagan tax cuts, the dot-com boom, the housing boom, the smartphone revolution, 2 stock market peaks at all-time highs, has left the median family in Tutwiler in the same real dollar position as the median family during the Great Depression. The federal economists who track this data, when they pull the Tutwiler numbers, double-check them. They assume there is an error. There is not. The number is the number. How is this possible? Let me tell you what Tutwiler looks like. The downtown is one street. There is a small post office. There is a community education center run by a Catholic religious order which provides after-school programs, a small library, computer access, and a food pantry. There is no grocery store. The nearest grocery store is in Clarksdale, about 20 miles away. Most residents do not own reliable cars. Many of them buy their food from gas stations or rely on the food pantry or take infrequent trips to Clarksdale when they can find a ride. There is no doctor in Tutwiler. There is no dentist. There is no pharmacy. There are several churches. The churches and the community education center are the social infrastructure. They are the only social infrastructure. The houses are mostly small wooden structures, many of them built in the 1940s or 50s. Many of them have leaky roofs, single-pane windows, and inadequate heating. Winter electricity bills, when residents can afford to run their heaters, can exceed $300 in a month in a town where the median monthly household income is $1,600. So most residents do not run their heaters. They wear coats inside. They sleep under multiple blankets. The same way their grandparents did during the Depression, the same way their great-grandparents did before that. The school in Tutwiler serves a small number of children, almost all of whom qualify for free lunch and free breakfast. The teachers are dedicated. The teachers are also exhausted and underpaid, and most of them do not live in Tutwiler. They commute in from Clarksdale or Greenwood. The graduation rates are below state averages. The college attendance rates are far below state averages. The students who do go to college overwhelmingly do not return. There is nothing for them to return to. In 1903, on the railway platform that used to run through Tutwiler, the composer W.C. Handy heard a black man playing slide guitar with a knife. The man was singing about going where the Southern Railroad crossed the Yellow Dog Railroad, about going somewhere, anywhere, away from where he was. Handy wrote the song down. He published it. He went on to write Memphis Blues and St. Louis Blues, and he was later called the father of the blues. The slide guitar, the bottleneck slide style, the 12-bar form, the call and response structure, the lyrical preoccupation with movement and escape and longing, all of it crystallized in the Delta, in towns like Tutwiler, in the early 1900s. From there, it traveled to Memphis, to Chicago, to New York, to London, to Tokyo, to every continent. Billions of dollars of music industry revenue, billions of dollars of cultural capital, billions of dollars of influence on every form of popular music that came after. None of it stayed in Tutwiler. The railway platform where Handy heard the song is gone. The railway itself was abandoned decades ago. There is a small historical marker in town, paid for by the state of Mississippi, commemorating the birthplace of the blues. Tourists, occasionally, drive through, take a photo of the marker, and drive on. They do not stop. There is nowhere to stop. There is no museum, there is no diner, there is no hotel. There is the marker and the empty street and the small wooden houses and the people who live in them, who are the descendants of the people who invented the music that the world stole. A woman named Mae Jenkins, who is 68 years old, has lived in Tutwiler her entire life. Her grandfather worked the cotton fields. Her father worked the cotton fields. She worked the cotton fields as a teenager and then in a processing plant for 22 years before the plant closed. She now lives on Social Security, helps care for 2 grandchildren, and volunteers at the Community Education Center 2 days a week. She told a journalist a few years ago, "My grandfather was poor, my father was poor, I am poor, my children are poor, my grandchildren are poor. The music people sang here got rich, the land here got rich. The people here did not get rich. We are still here, the music is gone. The land belongs to people who do not live here. We are still here. We are still here." That is the sentence. That is the sentence that runs through every town on this list. We are still here. The country forgot about us. The economy moved on without us. The cameras left. The reporters stopped coming. The federal government tracks us in a database called Persistent Poverty Counties, and the database has been mostly the same for 50 years. We are still here. The Great Depression never officially ended in our town. It just stopped being on the news. The news moved on. The town did not. That is Tutwiler. That is number 1 on this list. If you want to understand what poverty looks like when it has been frozen in place for 90 years, you look at Tutwiler. You look at the houses. You look at the food pantry. You look at the empty platform where the blues was born. You look at the people who are still there, doing the work of being alive, in a country that has decided, by 1,000 small decisions over 1,000 months, that their town is not part of the future. The blues was born in Tutwiler, and the blues stayed in Tutwiler because nothing else was ever born there to take its place. So here is what I want to leave you with. The Great Depression officially ended in 1939. That is what the textbooks say. That is what the economic charts say. That is the consensus. But the consensus is national. The consensus is an average. The consensus hides the towns where the Depression was not an event, but a condition, where the Depression did not end because the conditions that produced it never changed. The cotton economy of the Delta, the coal economy of Appalachia, the river economies of the heartland, the colonia economies of the border, the shrimping economies of the Gulf. These were not economies that recovered. These were economies that the rest of the country quietly walked away from, because the work that fixing them would have required was harder and more expensive and more politically uncomfortable than just letting them slowly die. So they slowly died, and they are still slowly dying. And the people who live in them are still doing the work of being alive, in places where the economic clock stopped in 1935 and never started again. If you watched this far, you understand something most Americans do not. You understand that the economy you read about in the headlines is not the economy that exists. You understand that there are tens of thousands of Americans in hundreds of towns living in conditions that the national narrative pretends ended generations ago. You understand that "we are still here" is the most important sentence in modern American poverty, because it means the people are still there, watching, waiting, still hoping that someone will notice. Subscribe to Report State if you want to keep noticing. Hit the like button if this video hit you the way it hit me when I was researching it. Share it with someone who thinks the American economy is doing fine, because the American economy is doing fine. For most of us, for most of the country, for most of the time. And these 10 towns are the price. In the next episode, we go somewhere stranger. These 10 towns are stuck in the 1930s, a real decade, a real period, a real economic moment that they never escaped. The next 10 places on Report State are stuck in an era that never existed at all. They are towns built around an idea of America that the country sold them, that the country promised them, and that the country never actually delivered. Phantom decade towns, imagined future towns, promise economy towns. You are going to want to see this one. Until then, we are still here, they are still there. Pay attention. This is Report State.